Welcome, this is Jim, host of the Faith Influencer podcast, where we're going to dive into discussions on faith's role in everyday life, from navigating blended families to overcoming challenges. I'm a husband, a father, a Bible teacher, an advocate for applying faith to everyday life. So tune in as I share personal stories, valuable insights, and practical wisdom. Do you know that God wants you to have a tremendous blended family? When you blend a family, it doesn't mean it's second best because it's the second time. Not at all. I want you to think of this differently. And by the way, this is Jim Cunningham with Faith Influencer, and I'm excited about dealing with the blurred lines of ambiguity inside of blended families. I want you to think of your blended family now as the first, as the most important, as the forever, as God's will, as what God wants to bless, that God has great plans. This is going to be good. I want you to look at it that way. But I also want to be realistic and say that if there's ever going to be ambiguity inside of a blended family, it's going to be centered around the roles of everyone in the family. This is what I call blurred lines. This is that area where it seems to be in this new blended family that there's confusion between the role of the husband and the father, the role of the mother and the wife, the role of the children. Everybody's confused. There are these blurred lines as to where I fit into all of this and what I can do and can't do and what I can say and can't say. So I want to deal with that today, and I want to help us make things run smoother in this area, because the more you know, the smoother it's going to be. The less you know, the more traps you're going to fall in. So let's begin a journey through this by giving you a big assignment. Now, I know you didn't tune in for assignments, but I'm going to give you one that's going to be good. Now, remember the context of this assignment. The assignment is we're trying to create a picture for everybody involved as to their role. But what you're probably not thinking, and most people don't, ought to, but don't, you don't realize how many arms this new family has. You don't realize the complexity that's involved. I want you to consider doing this with everybody in your family. I'm talking about the husband, the wife, your children, everybody together. I want you to come together and create what I'm going to call a family map. Now, we're trying to unblur the lines here, and they're more intense than you're even thinking right now, but I'm going to describe it. Let's call it a diagram. Whatever you want to call it, I want you to sit down, get this big cardboard, this big sheet of paper, something, and begin diagramming the family. And you say, well, that's easy. So we have the husband, the wife, the bio, the step parent. Then let's say he has 2 kids and she has 2 kids. So you've diagrammed that in the middle of the page, and you say, there we go. There's our family map. We have 6. Oh, no, you don't. That's not even close to how big this diagram's getting ready to get. You map that out between husband and wife and children, but then often there are 2 households on each side. Well, think about this. You have his parents and maybe his grandparents. You have her parents, the wife, the mother, and maybe her grandparents. So now you've drawn lines to those family members. And then for the dad, your stepchild, guess what? Your stepson or daughter, they have another family with their bio parent. And that bio parent who lives in a different household, maybe they have a blended family. And now your bio and stepchild has other siblings in other households to boot. Now, how big is this family? Well, all of a sudden, you've gone from the original 6 that we diagrammed in the middle of this page to over 20 people who make up this family. And one of the blurred lines is that, especially for children, they do not know how they fit into this big picture. But sometimes, and I know this is true, sometimes when you blend a family, let's take my situation, I didn't know any of my wife's family. And not only did I not know them, but they were so different, not bad, just different than how I was raised and what they were into. And I really felt uncomfortable. So I wasn't for sure how I related to them and connected with them. But then not only that, they have their peculiarities that my wife had to tell me, okay, this person is, so don't say this because they've been through that. And so, okay, I'll try to remember that. Now, who's married to who and who's connected to who? Do you see what I'm saying? The complexities of a blended family. So there is this huge diagram that you're going to map out. Now, let me tell you why this is good. Unfortunately, people have said it this way about a blended family, and honestly, it's true, is that step families are born out of hurt because there's been a breakup. There's been a division. There's been a divorce. So what we're trying to do is unblur some lines. So what's going to happen is you're going to draw out this map, and then you're going to begin to describe and tell some of the stories of some of the family outside of your particular household. And listen, it's okay as you're having your children participate because you're making this positive, what was born out of hurt. You're making this positive. It's okay that as you're describing, maybe in my case, my parents to my stepchildren, I'm telling a little bit about their story so they feel a little connection to their new grandparents. It's okay as you're describing all of that, then as if your stepchild then wants to describe their bio parent who lives in another household, or some of their new siblings in that other household, or maybe some grandparents that they just love who are in that house. Maybe they want to tell you about them. That's okay. That's the assignment. Have fun with it. Create this diagram, this family map, and show all the connections and make this new blended family God's best now. From here on, God's best. That's what we're doing, and that's how we're connecting. But what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to accomplish that we have all these different roles that are involved, and we're trying to make it go smoother and unblur the lines. So, blurred lines, yes. I had an idea when I remarried what the idea of my new spouse was going to be. And I promise you that she had an idea as to what my role was with her, but she had an idea of what my role was for her children. But guess what? If there are exes involved, do you know that that ex has a role as to what his ex-wife's new husband's place is going to be with his children? He has expectations as to your role with his children and your role with his children or her children. Exes have expectations too that enter into the picture. That's part of the complexity. And then kids have expectations as to what these roles are going to be. And if there's any confusion between mom and dad, husband and wife, there's going to be confusion with the children. So let's take all of these roles and begin to map them out. Now, here's what happens. The first time you get married, you created a couple. That's before children. That's just you created a couple. And your goal was to be a better couple. But the second time you get married with a blended family, you created a family. Different than the first time. You created a family. Now you're not just, let me invent some words. You're not just working on coupleness. Now you're working on familyness. So it's different than the first time. So then how do we outline these roles? So let me tell you a story that's personal that happened to me, and this was my introduction. So it was a long work week for me and my new wife. She had two, I had two. Long week, looking forward to coming home Friday. You know how sometimes Friday is a great day because you have the weekend. Hardly saw each other during the week. It was just passing. Very little time to have any communication. Well, her daughter is away to college. And she was coming home for several days. And I come home on Friday. And I walk into the house and we go through our routine. But somewhere on that Friday evening, I say to my wife, we haven't even seen each other this week. I'm looking so forward to spending Saturday together. And she gave me this look. And I said, what? And she said, honey, my daughter's coming home for the weekend. And I promised her I would spend Saturday with her because I haven't seen her, and I would take her shopping. And I'm sure that my look was surprise because we didn't communicate about that. But I also felt sorry for my wife because this is what happens with bio parents. She felt stuck between the two of us. She felt stuck between her husband and her biological daughter. And now she's in between. So how do you navigate these complexities? How do you deal with all of these? So I've spent all of this time trying to build up these complexities and these roles and the different arms that it takes so that I could get to this. I want to give you two things that blur the lines and that create this complexity and make it even worse. And here's the first one. So I want you to get this. You jot this down, do something to remember this, because these are the two mistakes as we're creating this wonderful blended family that God's going to bless. These are the two mistakes. Here's the first one. We have the tendency to give away spousal love to our children or to a child when there's no spouse in the household. When you go through a divorce and it's just you and your children, it is such a huge mistake, but a common mistake. And I found myself being guilty of this as well, to begin to confide in an older child because the spouse is not there. You begin to confide in that older child. You begin to even ask advice from that older child. You begin to emotionally lean on that older child. And what you've done is you've given away spousal love to a child. I understand. I did that. I had an older daughter and she was finishing up high school. She was wise. She was very sensitive to what was going on. I was her dad. And there was this special father-daughter relationship. And I found myself saying stuff to her or asking for advice or letting her know what I was doing, almost permission when I would go do things. And it was creating a different bond than a father-daughter bond. That's not how God intended it. So if you're doing this, probably you have. Here's the downside, and this is why I'm warning you as we're trying to unblur the lines. You're creating something in that child that wasn't meant to be. Your child was not meant to be the adult in the family. They were not meant to take on the adult roles in the family. And once those are placed on them, listen, because this is so important. Once you place those adult roles on them, you can hardly take them back. The time's coming when you need to take them back, but you can hardly do it now. Why are you going to need to take them back? Because do you remember when God created the family in the first place and he created man and woman and he said that a man shall cleave unto his wife? He shall leave and cleave. You remember that in the book of Genesis? Leave and cleave. When you remarry, that's still true. That's still true. It's not untrue because it's your second marriage. It's still true. You have to leave and cleave to your new spouse. That's what you have to do. But the problem is now you've placed this spousal role on a child and the new spouse comes into the picture. And when they do, and you begin to place now your spousal love with your new spouse, guess what? Your child who was given the spousal love is not going to like it. They're not going to like it. Don't think that they're just going to fall into line and say, oh, okay, now, mommy, you have a husband. No, or dad, you now have a wife. So, oh no, there's going to be tension there. They're going to want that role. And here's what's going to happen. And some of you listening right now know this has happened in your family. Your child's going to compete against your new spouse. That's just what's going to happen. They're going to compete for that place in your heart, in your life, with your attention. They're going to compete for that. And that spells disaster. It spells disaster because you have to connect to your spouse, your new spouse, as your forever spouse from here on, God's blessing, God's best. But you can't do it if you've given away the spousal love. So that's one. And by the way, it's so important, even if you have to go through the fight to get there, it's so important for your children to see the model relationship now between husband and wife. So it's worth, if you've made that mistake, it's worth taking back that spousal love. Maybe you need to sit down with your child and say, honey, I love you so much, and you've done everything you could to help me through this tough time, and we've been there for each other, but I've made a mistake, and here's what it is. I've relied on you as an adult, and I now can't do that. And to just explain to them. And then what you must then present is how God intended for a marriage to be with your new spouse. They need that model. That's the first thing. Don't give away spousal love. Here's the last thing. The second thing is that not only is there the tendency to give away spousal love, there's the tendency to give away parental decision-making to our children when there's not another spouse in the household. Similar to spousal love, children begin to take on, because you give them, especially an older child, you give them the role of authority. Now, there is a place for that. I'm not saying that an older child doesn't take a place of authority, because they do. If there are younger siblings, sometimes an older child just grows up a little faster. They just do. They just step into this role. But what I'm saying to you is, even though they have to take on more of a role, more authority, more, and I prefer the word responsibility than maybe they would have if there were two parents in the household, even though they take more of a role, they're still not the parent. They're still not the parent. You cannot give up the parental role. That child does not become your equal as a parent. They're more responsible, and we're thankful for the help, but they can never be the parent. So you cannot give away the parental decision-making to a child, because here's what happens. Then you remarry, the new spouse comes into the house, and now we have too many people in the role of parent. Not going to work. That's the blurred lines. That's what I'm talking about. That's what creates this ambiguity. Too many parents in the household. So what do? You have to take back that parental role. Responsible, thank the Lord for a child who can step up and be responsible. Parent, not their position. It's not their role that they're to be in. So you can't misplace a child in your family. You can't misplace a spouse. Listen, you can't misplace a stepfather, your new spouse. You can't put them in a position where they're equal with the children. That happens so often. Do you know how many times a new dad in a blended family with stepchildren has said to me that I feel like my wife gives as much or more credibility to their child's opinion than mine, to their child's advice than mine. And I find that oftentimes, and this is the manipulation that happens in this scenario, he will say to me, has said to me so many times, that I feel like that her child is manipulating this. Well, heck yeah, they are. That's what children do. That's in the job description of blended families. If I can manipulate, I'm going to. If I can get in between you, I'm going to give it a shot. So this is where the bio parent must sit down with their child and explain the roles. So here's the big picture. We're going to draw out a family map, and we're going to diagram the roles of everyone in, and it's at that place in a positive, loving way that you set the foundation that there is a different relationship between mom and dad, between mom and her new husband, between dad and his new wife. There's a different role that they have than the children have. It's not the same. So now you're going to cut these ties that you created. So there's the beginning of taking some of these blurred roles and make them a little smoother. I hope you have fun with the family diagram. This is Jim Cunningham with Faith Influencer.